it was just good, even if I never saw him, it was just really good to just hear that voice in the background somewhere going, and just
Mark's
like, oh,
here.
Mark's here. You
Yeah.
know, it's like that was just,
He was
whether
a-
I talked to him that night or not, it was just like,
Yeah, he was a fixture.
oh,
He was
yeah.
just- you wanted him to be
Yeah, he needed
part
to
of
be
this
there.
and-
Yeah, he had to be there.
It was at Cliff Cunningham's house, and we had been partying to the wee hours of the morning, and now it was light. And Mark and I were the only ones left up. Everyone else had passed out, and we were standing in the kitchen and talking away, and somehow we got into some conversation about men hitting women, and I don't know why, but I dared Mark to hit me. And so this went on for like about 20 minutes of me trying to convince him to hit me, and him trying to convince me not to have him hit me. And then finally he did, and when he did, I was knocked to the ground, but not, I wasn't knocked out or anything, and it didn't even hurt. It was just a pastime. And after that, I guess that gave me an excuse to leave the party because, once it starts getting light, you enter a whole new realm. And I was living in Orange County at the time, and I had to get home. So that kind of was my exit. But I don't hold it against Mark because I asked him to do it, and he was just complying with my wishes. I thought that he wouldn't do it. I thought that, we were friends, good friends, and, he wouldn't do it. Mm-hmm. But he did. So it was just another one of those interesting occasions that passed in time.
Mm-hmm. And if you were a piece of shit, he would tell you that. There was never any. He didn't mask anything over with sugarcoat. He told it like it was. And he got in my face a few times about how to deal with relationships with women in sobriety, and I was going through a massive divorce and dating lots of girls at the time, and flipping out over every chick I met in the shop, and la la la. And he always had his 2 cents to add into it, and a lot of times I listened to him. There was times when he pissed me off, but, he was my friend, and I always, from being around him for a lot of years, I realized he could be very brash and in your face, and it might piss you off, so what,
Do you remember what he did?
No, he told me that, not to get hung up on any of the broads, just to fuck them all and have a good time, and not let them creep into my heart again till I'm ready. He goes, and one day you'll know that you're ready. And he looked at a lot of them, I think, too, as they were just for sport. There wasn't any reason to get very involved emotionally or mentally with them at this point in my life, just to go have fun and not worry about feelings. And if somebody gets hurt, so what? It's just the way it is. But he also was respectful of people's feelings, too. I've seen sides of Mark Rude that were, when you're sitting there crying because your life's gone to shit, Mark Rude could come up, put his arm around your shoulder and say, "It's going to be all right, dude. It gets better." He's the one who told me early in my sobriety that it'll get better. I thought I was going to die for a while, And he goes, "Dude, it'll get better. You just stay on the path you're on." He influenced me heavily in the early days of when I first got clean, because I was fighting a major battle of my own, and I didn't really want to listen to anybody, but I respected him, so I listened to him.
He was sincere.
Yeah, he spoke from the heart. He never, it was always from here. There was never any. He wasn't a bullshit guy. The Mark Rude I knew, I didn't know him after all the problems happened up north or in Las Vegas. I didn't see him anymore, but the guy that I knew that left that one day and I said goodbye to was a guy that I always respect. I love the guy, and there was things about him that pissed me off because sometimes he was really pragmatic about things, and he was opinionated, highly opinionated. But, why not? It's like he was a New Yorker. What do you want?
He'd moved to the good side of the building, and I took the vacant apartment. And I didn't speak to him for probably like the first month, and then this would have been '91, yeah. And then I bumped into him in the hall, and he was commented. He was like, "You play good music in your apartment. I hear your music, and it's good stuff." And I was like, "Oh, thanks." And so we just started talking. You know, we shared an obsession with the Dead Boys, so we would dissect the first Dead Boys album, you know, and talk about that. I think you know, I mean, I remember him telling me that, like, when he would move into a new place and set up his stereo to run his stereo through, the first thing he would play was Sonic Reducer, which affected me in any place I've ever lived since. It's great. You know, some people burn sage and run through their apartment doing that shit. Now you put Sonic Reducer on and it knocks the bad vibes out of the room, you know? It's a new start.
One of the times I remember most about Mark is like after I split up with my girlfriend and had a bad patch for a while. The band broke up. I split up with my girlfriend. My brother committed suicide in front of his family and everything. It was kind of a bad time for me. And I spotted my girlfriend in a club, and she was like wearing a see-through bodysuit, and everybody was around her, and like nobody was around me. I was feeling kind of on a pity pot, and I was feeling kind of low and slunk over. Mark comes up to me and he goes like, you know, what's going on? And I pointed it over to her, and he goes like, dude, you know, you're going to go through whatever you're going to go through. You're going to feel whatever you're going to feel. And it's okay whether you feel real bad. Just do it with your fucking spine straight. And, you know, I totally related to what he was saying, you know. And in one way, he was like, you know, I think he was very conscious of, like, you know, he was like, you know, don't let the public know how you feel. And on the other way, it was like, you know, it'll be good for your self-esteem.
He, you know, wrote in Slash magazine, and that was the LA Bible as far as punk magazines go. It was like, you know, punk in New York. You know, Slash was LA.
What did you remember from that? Do you remember the article?
Well, it was a consistent column. You know, they had a lot of columnists that wrote about different things. You know, because Slash is more than just a punk magazine. They would also write about, you know, the other music that was going on. And he just wrote about what was going on down in San Diego, and how, you know, mostly, you know, how, you know, the people that were part of the scene were really into it more than a lot of the people in LA were, which is true. You know, LA had a lot of weekend punks. And down there, I think, you know, you really had to show your shit. So you really wanted to, you know, show everybody how hardcore you were.
We'd shoot the scene. We'd do maybe 1/4 of the stuff on the poster would be bands. And the rest would all be people on the scene. So you're interested in clothing and hair and tattoos, whatever was going on in the scene. It was like kind of the bands were like secondary. So we'd follow the bands, whether we got in a club or not in a club, it didn't matter. It was just kind of just shoot what was going on. And so we're going to go down to San Diego.
So this is the North Park Lions Club. This is where Mark Root and I first promoted our shows in San Diego. So when we promoted the shows, different people did different things. So Mark typically would book the bands because he was in with the bands. He knew everybody, had really good relationships with everybody because Mark was a no bullshit type of guy. Sherry would work the door because she was very organized and was much too sweet to steal any money from any of us. I would put up the money for the shows, and Mark would typically run security.
I don't think I really knew what an incredible artist he was until he started doing stuff for the Battalion of Saints. I mean, I had seen some of his drawings and stuff, but I don't remember knowing a lot about, you know, the detail involved in his artwork and how long it took and how much time he spent until he started working for the Battalion of Saints. And then, you know, I saw their record album and how long it took him to do that artwork, and I was just amazed.
The Battalion of Saints, and I mean, he was definitely behind that band. Like he liked the people, he liked the music. I mean, their music was fantastic. It still holds up today. And I'm sure that was his first major artwork for a band, was the Battalion of Saints EP. So that was his start, and when people saw that, you know, they were definitely blown away. There was nothing like that back in the old punk days.
Of course, he and Mickey had been doing the Dead or Alive thing for a while, and Mark had expressed an interest to us about managing us.
He says, you know, I want to be your guys' manager, you know. And I go, well, you know, what are you going to do? And he goes, well, I'll get you gigs, I'll do this thing, you know, I'll get you gigs in LA to you know, help you out. And I'm like, cool, because, you know, at the time the guy was, you know, he was in. You know, he knew a lot of people in LA and around, and it always helps.
He did do a lot for us, did get us a lot of shows, and helped hook us up with people in the, you know, other bands and other cities. And also helped with the on the promotional end with doing the flyers, and he did our album covers.
My friend Lisa and Don and I had decided that we were going to kind of put together a nightclub night ourselves. So we came up with the idea of doing the Reptile House, and we were doing it at a place called the Bacchanal, because Don, who was going to be the DJ, his cousins owned the Bacchanal. So we were making plans for this, and before we had a chance to have our first night is when Mark came back. And you know, Mark asked what was going on, we told him about that, and suddenly he insinuated himself into this, where he was a part of our group putting together the Reptile House. And then of course everything had to be his way, and you know, Mark could be really belligerent, and since he wasn't working anymore, he didn't have anything else to do, this was the thing he was going to be doing. And it just didn't work out.
Mark eventually opened his own club called the Reptile House, and he, you know, God, I want to say like he was back behind the bar sometimes. You know, he'd be like out front, you know, taking tickets behind the bar, you know, at the soundboard or checking the lighting.
He did this giant iguana on the lizard on the dance floor, and he was down there on his hands and knees for days. It was like his Sistine Chapel. He was down there, except upside down. He was down there on the ground and he had all these special paint brushes, these old paint brushes and stuff that he had perfected to create this large lizard, which Reptile House. That was, you know, that was his whole thing. I'm sure he came up with that name, you know. And this, yeah, I mean, this thing must have been 14 feet long. And to watch him work, it was just incredible, laying there on the floor.
He said that he didn't want to turn 30 in San Diego. He wanted to get up to LA by then. And that was his plan, and I know he did that.
I think the reason why Mark left San Diego for LA is, you know, I think he kind of felt he's done all he can to, and he needed more. You know, he needed to be where things were happening. You know, like that's all part of his. You know, if it's not going the way he wants it, he's gonna make it happen. So, and he knew LA. Mark told me one time, it's a quote from Martin Luther King, where he told me, "There's a time to let things happen, and then there's a time to make things happen."
See, he was the big man on campus in San Diego. But when he came to LA, by the time he came, the LA scene had grown quite a bit. It probably gone from about 1,000 kids to about 10,000.
In San Diego, he felt like drill instructor. Big buff, strong, cropped hair, super.
Yeah, the kids were in boot camp.
Yeah, exactly. He was the drill instructor kind of dude or whatever. Yeah, and then later it's almost like he turned into a skinny Hollywood guy.
Right about 1980, I started playing with a punk rock band called the Mau Mau's in LA, and I was really heavily involved in the punk scene. And Mark was definitely just one of the characters that stood out in the punk scene. So if you were involved in any way in rock and roll and going out to clubs, you knew who Mark was.
I sort of worked side by side with Mark, so we would be just making sure whoever was on stage was supposed to be there. You know, but most of the time what Mark was trying to get me to do is just like ask questions and not let anybody up unless he said so, and which was pretty intimidating. I mean, an 18-year-old not knowing anybody in LA, just sort of like, who are you? And, you know, realizing it's like, you know, some guy in Nick Cave's band or something. Like, I had no idea, you know. So he educated me to all that stuff a little reluctantly, but pretty much told me the ropes, you know. All the years that I worked with him, I think only 1 or 2 times I saw him sort of cut loose and have a really good time at a gig, and that was when like one of his best friend's bands were playing, or he was really close with them and there was enough people to deal with all the stuff. Like if I was there covering, most of the time, you know, he was pretty by the book job guy, like he dealt with everything. I was really, really naive to any kind of drug use or alcohol abuse or, you know, drugs in general, and didn't really know what, you know, what people did or what to look for or anything like that. But so, you know, he never really talked specifics about, you know, using, but he sort of steered me away from a couple of people early on that I was like palling around with and had no idea, and he, you know, sort of gave me the lesson of, you know, stay away from this guy and this is the reason why. And then he would ask me to observe things in people. Like we would just pick people out of the audience, because it was kind of fun sitting there watching people in the audience before a band would play or between bands. You just sort of like, I mean, watching people was fun for him and me, just to sit and sort of check it out. And so he would send me out to look at a certain guy or to talk to a certain guy, ask me what I saw, and 90% of the time I missed all the marks. You know, it's like, you know, look and see what do his eyes look, what's he doing with his hands, what's his skin look like, you know. And so he sort of educated me to that, what to look for with, you know, people who use speed to people who use heroin, and sort of tried to make, not necessarily say don't do it, but just to say stay away from these certain people, which on one level I was appreciative of, but on another level it sort of opened up that world a little quick for me, like, wow, all these people I know, or, you know, a lot of people were into it and I just had no clue, I had no idea. And so there was a while there where I was sort of freaked out, like, it was pretty heavy, you know. I'd never really been educated like that before until him.
Anyway, 45 Grave was playing, and it was packed. There was a lot of people there, and it was a big stage. Marc was hired to handle one side of the stage, and I was on the other side of the stage. And basically my job was just to sit there and make sure everything was okay. I didn't really think I had any responsibilities. I just wanted the night to be over so I could get paid and go home. There was one incident where this skinny teenage kid like got up on stage with no pants and just a t-shirt, no pants, no shoes, anything. Just started dancing around and waving his penis around and stuff and rubbing up against Diana Cancer. And then he did a stage dive and went into me and Marc were like looking at each other and just laughing. And then the kid like did a stage dive into the audience and he disappeared. So that was the end of that. And then he got up again and then wouldn't get off stage. He just kept dancing around naked, you know, and then every time, and Diana Cancer was kind of walking away every time like he'd come up and start rubbing up against her and stuff. And me and Marc just couldn't stop laughing because it was so funny. And it seemed kind of harmless. So neither one of us really did anything about it, but he was like kind of closer to my side of the stage. And so Marc finally just started kind of strolling out really casually, and he grabbed the guy by the arm and just pointed off to the side of the stage on my side, escorted him off to my side. And I came up about halfway and it helped him, and we escorted him off. And then as soon as we escorted him off, 2 huge bouncers came from the other door and like came and grabbed him and slammed him down on the ground and started choking him and then dragged him off. And we never saw the kid again. But me and Marc were having a conversation and we said, well, that was really uncalled for. So, I mean, Marc would never do anything like that. I mean, he had some like, these bouncers obviously felt they had something to prove. But anyway, Marc talked to me and he said, look, from now on, there's a line, an invisible line across the middle of the stage. Anything that happens on your side of the stage, you handle. Anything that happens on my side of the stage, I'll handle. And then if it's too big, then we'll help each other out, you know. But if it's something like that, just, you know, escort them off, you know. Right. And that was the end.
When we first started hanging out, I mean, he would play stuff like Johnny Thunders, New York Dolls, stuff like that I'd never heard of. I mean, in my upbringing, you know, where are you going to hear about that stuff?
You know, you'd go in his house and he'd just grab you. Hey, why don't you listen to this? And you go, what? I didn't come over here. I came over here to tell you about something. Oh, you got to listen to this.
And so it's like, if I had some money, we'd do a deal where it's like I'd buy a couple of records from his massive collection that he had, you know. He'd say, you know, you want to buy a couple of records, and he'd pick out some things that he was looking to sell at Aaron's or something like that, and I'd take a look at what he had and give him some cash for what he had.
I mean, this guy that we were playing with, who was very charming and very sweet and had a great personality and was, you know, very, felt like very open, and, you know, we took to him really quick. He was a couple years older than us, and we didn't notice any problems or anything, but, you know, after like a month or so and playing with him, he, you know, buzzed us up to the apartment or something like that and said, hey, it's like 4 a.m, I need a place to crash, you know, I locked my keys out of the car, whatever it was, some story seemed innocent enough. We just buzzed him up. He crashed on the couch and we went to bed. You know, the next morning we woke up and he was gone way early, 6, 7 in the morning, and my bass gear was gone too. And even for probably an hour after that, I didn't even put it together. Like, I honestly thought, there must be some reason for this. I mean, he must have just borrowed it, or maybe I honestly left it somewhere else and I just don't remember. And so I called up Mark when, you know, we sort of figured there was a little weirdness around this, and woke him up, and he pointed us in the right direction of the pawn shop to go to because he knew of this guy. And so I called the cop from Hollywood Station. We went down there, and sure enough, it was there, and we got it back. I mean, he knew right away, and so then it really hit home, like, you know, what he's telling me to do and staying away from certain people, no matter how charming they are, is adequate, accurate, and right on. And so no matter how much I liked a certain person, there was just a certain amount that he said, don't open up to everybody, you're just being naive. I mean, if you think that you can open up to everyone that's nice to you, you know, you're just going to get hurt, which on some levels I appreciate, and on others I felt it was a little harsh. Like, my natural instinct was to open up to this person, but in the end it ended up being, it's like, it was like one of those father and son talks. It sounds weird, but it's true. It's like he was giving me advice that I thought, no, that's not right, but he did prove himself to be right, and it's like, okay, I get it, I'm sorry. And he made me know, like, I told you, don't hang around this guy, and I'm like, I know, sorry. You know, and from that point on, I mean, there was never a trust issue between us. I always trusted everything he said. I survived, you know, people that I probably shouldn't have been hanging around with because he pulled me out of there. He was like the dad who kicks in the door of the club, drags his 15-year-old girl out of the club like you're coming home. It's like, whether you like it or not, you know that that's the best thing. And he did that for me, for sure.
When I first came down from Fresno to Los Angeles, the first day gig I ever got was working at this 976 hole chat thing. Mm-hmm. And, you know, there was a lot of fucking weird, dude, there was transvestites, there was fucking hookers, there was all kinds of fucked up junkies, there was all kinds of fucked up people that worked at this place. Mm-hmm. And, you know, when I first, Mark was one of the first people I ever met there. And Mark was like, you know, trying to tell me, you know, well, you got to stay away from this character, you got to stay away from that character. He was totally just trying to, you know, look out for this kid, right, or this guy, you know. And I was a kid. I was like fucking, you know, I was a youngster. He knew something that I didn't know. Mark knew, you know, he knew everything that was going to happen behind every corner, you know, that you didn't know. There's a lot of poor people out there who have, you know, faced a lot of bullshit. And you know what? I mean, life is tough, right? And fucking Mark understood how tough life could be.
I always thought of him as the epitome of an archetypical New Yorker. He was a New Yorker, but he was living in LA. But he saw the madness of LA. He saw through the crap here too. And he knew how to move right into this scene here and flow with it, you know. And I didn't know him in San Diego, but, you know, up here, he, you know, but you could tell he was an East Coaster because he had that East Coast look too, you know. He was like a Johnny Thunder style to him, you know. I always thought he was a fashionable dude too. very fashionable.
Some of the other things I remember about Mark was the early fashion of punk. You know, nobody wanted to say it was fashion, but you know, he had the leather jacket. You know, I remember seeing that, and I'd never had a leather jacket. I always thought that was like the coolest thing. And I remember, you know, influenced by him and the others, you know, when I was going through my chemotherapy and cancer stuff, as soon as I had some money, I went down to San Diego Harley Davidson and got a leather jacket, you know, put studs on it like he did. But he never, to me, never copied anybody. He might have had the similar outfit to what other people had in the scene, but, you know, he always looked like Mark Rude. You know, he had something, you know, that was his idea, you know, with his fashion.
And, you know, Mark was a big part of that, you know. I mean, he was definitely there the first time around, you know, and he was instrumental in dictating the fashion and, you know, what was to be worn and what was acceptable and what wasn't. And he had some very, you don't have that kind of influence over people and fashion without having some really clear and firm ideas about what it's all about and what you want to, how you want to influence the world.
He had an influence culturally, and I think it spread its tentacles out in ways that people can't even imagine. I mean, it makes me laugh now to hear people talking about the punk rock aesthetic as though it's something new and they're inventing it now, or it started with Nirvana in a way, and before Nirvana was the Ramones or something like that, or and the Sex Pistols. And LA in the 80s was just such it was just such a creative force. And you know, we know about the music, you know, we know about the bands making the music, you know, so many of them became so famous, but there was this whole other aesthetic going on. As far as I'm concerned, Mark was the leader of that. He was the best at what he did, and when you look at these pieces of art that he made, that you know, the subject matter was so disturbing, and I was so used to seeing those images at the time that to me it was just like, yeah, this is part of the aesthetic. But to see them now compared to the other pieces I have left over from that period, his just stands out. He was the best artist. He just was, and he had no desire to get into any kind of mainstream or sort of 80s hip, trendy gallery. I'm sure John Polknam might have had something at the Zero of his occasionally, but for the most part, that's not what he was going after. But he was this amazing artist, and he was self-taught.
And after we saw that movie, we all did. We were like, yes, I need a dog and a gun and a car, and that's it. You know, it's all the other things in life that get in the way. Just take me back to a time where, you know, your whole aura, your whole life is validated by what you do. But he is definitely, he fit the image, you know. That was definitely him.
Like there was the time we were talking about the whole end of the world and the whole kind of road warrior life that could happen. And they were kind of dark conversations about how if everything kind of came to a halt and we were all sitting around and there was no food supply and it was just me, Mark, and Mark's son, and there was no food and we were all sitting around, Mark goes, well, you know, then I'd just kill you and me and my son would eat you because that's what we'd have to do to survive. And I went, whoa, okay, hope it doesn't come to that, Mark, but I see your point. But it was pretty scary thought.
What's that? Have to deal with Mark if he got hungry?
Yeah.
And his son.
Yeah, being devoured by Mark Rude, I think it would be a scary thought.
And then Mad Max a lot or Road Warrior?
I don't even know if on Mark and my affinity towards the whole Road Warrior concept or movie. I mean, I just thought I don't even know if we saw the movie actually together, but there were conversations about it, and me kind of going, well, you know, how could a life like that happen? And Mark would just kind of break it down, going, hey, there's no government, it's anarchy, it's take what you can get for yourself, and kill or be killed. And although when Mark would talk about that kind of lifestyle, I wouldn't be drawn to that. Like I wouldn't go, oh yeah, I hope that happens. Anarchy, yeah, tear down, no government. I would just more like, well, I don't really hope for any of that, because it just seems, very harsh and scary. But there were some things in the movie that I liked. Like I liked the hot rods and the Mad Max dog, which I have an Australian cattle dog now, and then the whole look, the tough guy with the the kind of the survivor mentality, fucked up leather jacket, tools hanging from your belt, mixed match shoes. Mad Max would have like one cowboy boot and one motorcycle boot, and it just was the whole attitude and look was really cool. So I think we both had a liking or an affinity towards that.
Once in a while he might smoke a cigarette or whatever. I never remember him really smoking or anything. He always had like that raspy, deep voice from 13 years old. I mean, he always had a deep, raspy voice. I would know his voice anywhere if I heard it. I mean, one of the funniest things when we did meet up again in Hollywood, and he was working at Mayhem Tattoo Parlor, the only reason I knew this was I had picked up a tattoo magazine and his picture was in it working at Mayhem. And I call him, and I know he was using the name Mark Rude. I had seen, he had been in Rolling Stone magazine. There's a full page picture of him in a Rolling Stone magazine for being an artist in, the punk era. And, so I knew he was going by the name Mark Rude. And I called the tattoo parlor. He answered the phone, and it was like, I didn't even have to it was like, hello, and I go, Mark. I go, is this Mark Hoffman? And he kind of laughed. He goes, who the fuck is this? And I said, Joe Stellan, and he just started laughing because, he didn't go by that name anymore. And, but it was funny as hell. And that was where we met up again and started hanging out for a while.
Now what about this?
Mark was introduced to me by Iris Berry. I was running a nightclub at the time. It was in maybe 85. I was running a nightclub called the Soundcheck. And Mark was Iris's beau, and he was quite interesting. I never quite saw so many tattoos in my life. But we became friends, and as time passed by and I went through different things and he went through different things, there came a point where I was running a nightclub called the Shamrock. Well, I was really, really, really good with the bands, but I wasn't really, really, really good with finances. And Mark came to me one time and said, Baba, I'd like to be your partner. He says, you need to start making money. You're doing a lot of things for the bands, and that's really great and everything, but you need to take care of yourself. And so Mark and I became partners. It was that simple. I was running a nightclub. I had a little restaurant on the side. And I remember one time, Mark, Iris and I were sitting in the kitchen, and I was getting stuff. I used garlic for everything. And I was getting the garlic ready for something or another. And Iris and I are having the time of our life trying to figure out how to get the stuff out of the garlic. I mean, take the garlic apart. And Mark comes in, goes to Iris, and he very gently goes, here, let me show you. And he just does this thing, and the garlic just falls open. And I don't know, but I thought that was about the sweetest thing I ever saw in my life. It's this burly, tattooed guy, just doing something so domestic. It was like, and then I said, yeah. After that, I said, sure, Mark, I'll be your partner. And Mark, as a business partner, you couldn't ask for anybody better in your whole life. I've never met anybody with better ethics. I remember times when he would book bands, incredible bands, and there would be a lot of money for the bands. And also, he would make sure that I took money. And it's like, but Mark, you booked this band. This isn't my money, it's your money. And he's like, no, you're my partner. And that's the way he was. I mean, if you had to partner with somebody, Mark Rood would be the one you'd want to partner with.
You guys ever had bickers over stuff?
The only thing we ever had bickers over is when I try to sneak in these little bands, you know, and we'd have like a big show planned and everything, and then I'd try to sneak in a little band that was up and coming, or not even up and coming, just a new band. I just happened to like them, you know, and he'd get a little upset about that, but he was never rough with me, ever. He would talk to me like a father, you know, he'd be very paternal with me, but, and you know, I usually concede and stuff, but after I had my little band play, so I would never we never really had, Mark and I never had any really big disagreements. We worked well together. You know, he was paternal, I was maternal, it worked well in the business. When we did have our disagreements, he would talk, you know, or we'd talk it out, or I could feel comfortable enough to Mark that I could say, yeah, but what about this, you know, and he'd go, well, yeah, but you got to look at it this way. And you'd end up seeing it Mark's way. But at least, you know, you talk it out. And I think that's the most important thing in any kind of relationship, whether it's business, personal. Mark and I while we were partners, we were back into the office and we were counting the money and getting it all split up for the band members and stuff. And all of a sudden I started hearing this pop, pop, pop. And I'm like running out there because I know something's happening, you know, and I go to run out there and Mark grabs me and throws me against the wall and he goes, you're not going to go out there. You're going to get killed if you go out there, you know. And I'm going, but it's my club. And he says, nothing's worth your life, you know, and he kept me there. And, you know, the people had come in and shot a few people and stuff. But I still feel to this day, if Mark hadn't done that, I wouldn't be here now because I don't always think with my head. But I always thought from that time he saved my life. He saved my life literally, and he saved my life financially. So yeah, I miss Mark. I do miss him. I don't know him as long as a lot of people did, and I don't know him the way a lot of people did. But I think there's many facets to every human being, and I think Mark was a diamond. You know.
Do you ever see his artwork?
Oh God, yes. I have some around here.